Welcome to Story Behind the Stone, a show where we talk service, sacrifice, and story. I'm so pleased to be joined by my co-host Ryan Mullins and our guest Kristin Sargent with Sargent Initiatives in Washington, D.C. Kristin, it's wonderful to see you. Thanks for being on the show today.
So great to be here. I'm a big fan of both of you.
So thrilled to have you on the show. Just to talk a little bit about who you are, what's keeping you busy, and your mission, which is just incredible. If you could just give a background on who you are and dive a little bit into who Sargent Initiatives is.
I started my career in the Army. So I served in air defense artillery in my early years. And towards the end of my tour, I was thrust into being my unit's information assurance officer. So essentially in charge of the early stages of cybersecurity. And it was that experience that really taught me how much modernization was required to get technology to work at the intersection of the military and true security. And so I really spent my career at that intersection from that point forward. I was at Booz Allen Hamilton, building contracts, leading contracts, and working in partnership with a lot of technology companies for that very purpose. Learned a ton, went on to Amazon Web Services, saw the real rise of cloud and the adoption of cloud and the challenges that are affecting the military and the supporting organizations and service members and the community, and really saw how basic business development and corporate development principles are really hard to adopt if you're coming out of the commercial sector and trying to then apply what you've built for the military and for the betterment of that type of market. And so I started my company, Sargent Initiatives, about 2 years ago with really that mission in mind, is how do I help companies that know nothing about the sector, but are very passionate about bringing what they offer and being of service to the sector? How do we help those companies streamline meeting the requirements, figuring out how to basically take one step at a time in bringing their business forward for that type of use case? And so that's my passion, is really helping these companies be healthy and efficient and really fast in bringing what they offer to the military community.
What kind of companies are you supporting today?
I support such a wide breadth of companies. I mean, I love Memory Anchor as an example. It's been such a dream to work with a company like yours and really helping you understand and navigate the steps it takes to go after the market. But then also, I've been working with publicly traded companies, so companies that are really oriented around helping to streamline, say, the security clearance process. I've worked with AI companies that are focused on really modernizing the Intel space and how Intel is correlated for various use cases. And so, really, it's been a broad breadth of companies that I work with, but the commonality that they all have is they have a true desire to serve and to be of service to the soldiers and the service members that need the better capabilities so that they're safer, they're more effective in their roles, and we can really build a better world with what the military requires.
What are some of those core challenges that you see companies and entrepreneurs running into when they enter that system?
The number one challenge I think they have is they don't know the set of requirements that they corporately have to meet, the boxes that they have to check to even be able to do business with the government. That's number one. And then number two, they don't know the order in which to check those boxes, right? You don't have to do it all at the same time. And so how can I efficiently use my resources to only check the essential boxes that I need to check? And then the third part is they don't know the number of resources and other companies that are out there that can help them check those boxes at a fraction of the cost that they would otherwise spend in either their own time and resources trying to build that capability in-house. And so that's essentially all my company is designed to do, is really look a mile wide and an inch deep and figure out, okay, where do you actually have gaps for your specific company to be able to do business in the sector? Let's first identify the gaps. Then let's identify how to actually create step 1, 2, 3 through N to address those gaps. And then, let's look at the third party resources in order to kind of drive down the cost and make it more efficient and effective for you to actually meet those requirements, so that you can continue to focus strictly on the development of your IP and of making your corporate mission continue to come to life, right? Let's keep the focus there. That's really what I'm trying to do, and it's always with an eye on building that defense or military and security business, but also by continuing to create a flywheel effect that feeds the remainder of the business, especially if it's in a commercial sector or with other governments, other markets. Right? We don't want to disrupt anything by trying to adopt what the U.S. market requires, and so that's a really fun balance. Is to be able to kind of help a company stay above it, see the forest for the trees, and then know how to tactically execute. And candidly, that's why our tagline is because execution matters.
There's a concept, Johari's window, what you know, the small little box, what you don't know, which is a little bit bigger, and what you don't know, which is huge. From our perspective, when we're walking into that, I remember really not understanding just how much we didn't know, and the importance of being able to find someone like yourself. There's so many amazing people out there and amazing products that could potentially really, really support veterans and the military in so many different ways. And running into those barriers can become that block. How, in your experience, do you keep your clients moving forward?
I actually keep my clients moving forward by helping them restrain from exerting too much effort on things that don't require it, right? I think I'm very good at helping my clients not get so far ahead, like so far over their skis that they're committing resources and they're spending money and they're spending time ahead of needing to, ahead of actually having the true market signal that requires you to then spend that effort. And so by helping to sustain that level of energy and kind of keep the level of energy a little bit more even, and keep the excitement not at bay, but just a little bit more moderated, I think it helps people not get too far too fast, too excited too fast, which then could cause to a greater letdown, right? If something doesn't work out. And so I probably shouldn't characterize it as this, but I do feel like I'm the one kind of a little bit throwing cold water on everyone all the time, just to say, like, I understand where you're coming from. I understand why you're excited. You had this type of conversation with the government, but this is who that player is. That player doesn't affect money. It doesn't affect buying decisions. So let's talk about next steps on how we get to the next conversation that can. And so it's really just kind of measured restraint and helping contextualize every conversation so that folks do have the sustained level of energy. I mean, this is running a marathon, and it's literally as simple as I don't want my clients sprinting at the quarter mile mark. That gets them and that gets the government nowhere. And so how do we kind of keep that even pace? How do we take that sip of water, eat that bite of the power bar, and just keep moving forward? I very much so view it in that type of lens.
You have kind of this unique position in your role, and you're supporting all these different organizations with different technologies and such like that. What's that current state or future state that you envision where some of these technologies, how is this going to make that new vision of the future?
My vision of the future is it's actually very technology agnostic, right? All I'm trying to solve for is if there is a company that thinks it's got something that can be beneficial to the military, then let's find a way to have what they offer exposed to the right people and test that hypothesis. Similarly, I want the military to have much better access to industry, right? I think there's a ton more work that can be done in making it far more streamlined and friction free for the military to actually get access. But right now, even we're seeing different changes to the federal acquisition regulation that are meant to take down a lot of barriers and put a lot more control in the hands of the actual acquisition professionals to award contracts in a creative and more streamlined manner. And so there are changes afoot that are moving us in the right direction. But at the end of the day, it's just a matter of exposure And then, right, let the companies have that exposure to the military. Let the military try out what they want. Let them have the full menu of options, and then let what works and what's most useful in performing the mission win the day, right? At the end of the day, I just want kind of a free marketplace that brings industry and the military more efficiently together. I think we're getting there, but we have a lot of work to do.
Thinking about the other side of the coin, government acquisition, you're involved in modernization efforts. What message are you trying to bring to government stakeholders when you're on the Hill?
The Hill has been really fun lately. I think primarily because it's actually a bipartisan effort to better connect. The Hill wants to genuinely connect with industry and learn, like you're saying, Ryan, what they don't know. They understand that they're in a really important position to enable change and to enable growth and modernization in the right ways. And so I have sensed a real appetite for listening to folks like myself and other really esteemed colleagues on these topics. What they're really looking for is tell us industry, where are we behind? Where are we in terms of the state of the art completely behind? And give us some ideas about how to catch up. Now, what I try to do, and I remember being in a forum recently, especially as a member of the Defense Entrepreneurs Forum, which is just an organic nonprofit trying to really help the national security mission modernize. Um, I was in a meeting on the Hill, and I asked the question, is there any talk of just plain pushing funding down to the unit level so that they have more finances, more resources, and then give them more autonomy to go ahead and go and buy what they think they need, right? When you think about things like 3D printing, when you see all of the innovations that we've seen Ukraine bring to the forefront in how they're forging their battles, I think there's a real interesting opportunity to decentralize a lot of how the military has historically worked in terms of acquisition. What was interesting is one of the people in the meeting with me kind of pushed back and he said, well, there's this really amazing apparatus of folks that know how to build weapon systems, and so we don't want to decentralize things and lose that apparatus. And all I'm trying to say is, well, we need both, right? We need an apparatus that builds more exquisite, very, very complex systems. But I think there's also a need and an appetite for having things that can be pushed down really to the unit level so that they can move at the speed and with the creativity that they're having on the ground on the fly. And so I think that's the type of perspective I'm bringing is if we can put ourselves into the literal boots of our soldiers, our airmen, right, our sailors, how can we empower them in the entrepreneurial way or the creative spirit that they have to really advance what they're needing to do and kind of take the gloves off. Now, that's hard to do with taxpayer dollars. You don't wanna just be handing out, bags of cash, but I think, some type of happy medium there is something that I'm very interested in. I try to bring that perspective, when on the Hill is how do we kind of decentralize and put the power back into the hands of those that need it.
What are veterans bringing? What is their unique voice that they're bringing to that intersection of defense and tech and policy?
I think the voice that we continuously bring is one of eternal frustration. Right? Like, we are eternally frustrated with what we weren't able to do when we were in the service. Like, what didn't work, how bad the technology was, how archaic certain processes were, and I think it's that frustration that feeds a lot of the innovation we're seeing in industry today, and that's why I'm so grateful to see as many veterans as I do in industry, and candidly, myself included, we feel like we are being as much of service on the industry side of the equation as we were when we were serving. And so that's a really fun blend to see. And I think that's also helping to break down a lot of the historical barriers that have sat between the government and industry really working together collaboratively to figure these types of problems out.
For a lot of soldiers, there's a struggle when they end up taking that uniform off and they've lived a life of service. And I think yourself is showing that like leading example of, well, how do I take what I saw, my experience, some of those challenges, and then some of the strengths I learned in the military, some of those qualities and skills I learned, and apply them ongoing to that, because it's a pretty broad spectrum. We've talked a little bit about, current military equipment kind of ideas, but there's a whole life cycle that soldiers go through in the military, from getting in to care after. When we see the spectrum, it's not just like active military. There's a whole spectrum of technology. What is your take on that spectrum, that life cycle?
It was really interesting, for example, to see at the AUSA conference. It's the big annual Army conference here in DC. There was a massive, massive emphasis on human performance. There's going to be, I think, a lot more acknowledgement and recognition of how to take care of the person, and how do you do that, and what technology does that take. Kind of acknowledging more fully that we are professional athletes when we put on the uniform. I'm seeing technology innovations and innovations, period, right? It doesn't even have to necessarily be about technology. When you think about acquisitions, to me, those are more process innovations, and we need those just as much, and they might even have more of an impact. When you look at innovation sort of in a multifaceted way, I'm seeing companies attack all ends of that, right? Whether it's um, the latest AI platform that can modernize how intel is gathered and correlated to. Um, I was working with a company that was really focused on how real estate data can be leveraged for an intel use case, something that
Okay.
I candidly hadn't thought about, but they could see very clearly as real estate agents and brokers who had kind of seen this data and what it could provide in terms of interesting visibility into behavior and money patterns. And so uh, when everyone is kind of from their own respective vantage point thinking creatively about how they can be of service and how they can bring what they're seeing forward, I think, it's I'm seeing every angle and every type of innovation be on the table at this point in time.
Entrepreneurs, ex-soldiers like yourself, they're bringing a lot of values, like personal values, personal passion, that is so important, because sometimes with technology or weapon systems, like, where's the value in in the heart in that? And so it's the soldier, it's the person who's using it, that is really bringing that. And I think in my experience in working with you, that's something that really came through, is your passion. When you think of the importance of these kind of values and to current service, your service that keeps going, what are those core values that are so important?
When I was in ROTC, so this is, back in college, there was a really, really intense infantry major who was training us, and he would drill that, right? It's mission, men, me, and always in that order. Mission, I like to put a WO in front of men sometimes, but mission, men, me, right? And and I that to me is so clear and so basic. Throughout my entire career, I feel like I have a sixth sense for people who have that alignment, and I can feel it when someone doesn't. When I'm talking to prospective clients, if I start to get a whiff of that they're doing this work to just make it big time, right? Make it rich, right? They want the power and the notoriety or what have you of getting a War Department logo on their pitch deck. Man, it's a quick conversation because that's candidly not the client that I should be working with. I don't want to work with them. That's not what I want to bring to the military. I constantly see companies like Memory Anchor where it is so prominent what your mission is. And then it's so easy for me to work with you because then my job is to just like feed your passion and help you be more successful. That's so much fun. And so, I would say that's sort of my value underpinning is that folks kind of know what their mission is, that they kind of operate in that order, and then they're in alignment with me and my company, and we can run together, and that becomes really powerful.
That idea of like mission, men, me, that hierarchy is so important, because when we see mission, what we can see is also like purpose. I think it's so important that we remind ourselves of that purpose, that connection, each other, and how do we drive that forward? And I appreciate that you have that awareness as you're working with companies. I think that is going to be a hallmark of success for people if we constantly remind ourselves of that.
It clarifies everything. It becomes easier if you're taking care of others, they start taking care of you too. And so, I remember being in a situation where we were all working tirelessly on things, but it got to the point where every single person I spoke with on the broader team was saying how stressed out they were. I just remember thinking, wow, we're all losing sleep. We're not eating properly. We're not exercising properly. Right. And so we started to kind of create a battle cry around how do we need to take care of ourselves to then also take care of the collective and keep going and keep this mission moving forward. I think there's a real harmony when you do it well. And when you're supported and around people, companies, organizations that are similarly aligned as well.
You're only as effective as how well you've taken care of yourself. So that's part of it too, is really making sure you're healthy, because if you're healthy, then you can really be present for your team. And when you're really present for your team then is thriving in it, that attention to results. And it's a really a reinforcing loop. If you were going to give like one piece of advice to a client that's entering this system, and you want to see them be successful, what is your wisdom? You got to keep this, and this in mind if you're going to be going down this road.
Number one is be patient. This is a 2 to 3 year play. And I will tell you, the companies that hit it big early end up not developing sustainable long-term businesses because they think that early hit, that early win is how it goes. And so number two, this is an endurance sport. Right. And it's about building the atomic corporate habits that are going to make you successful long term. Companies, they think they're building successful federal businesses because they're getting quick wins early on, but they are doing so at the detriment of building a long term, sustainable, exponentially bigger business. And so that's the other kind of sorting mechanism, if you will, that I use with my clients. I'm constantly pressure testing when talking to prospective clients what their level of patience is and what their understanding of an endurance sport in this context really means. Because without that, it's not going to work. And then the third thing I would say is the CEO must participate. That's a big misperception, I think. I think there's a lot of belief that all I need to do is hire my federal salesperson and we're good. And there's a really great article that a gentleman by the name of Nick Sinai wrote years ago. Many people in the circles kind of refer to it because it was so true. And it talks about how the third federal salesperson is the person that actually closes the book of business, because the first federal seller comes in, kind of educates the C-suite and the organization on what's required. They start building pipeline. The second person starts really building the pipeline, and then the third person reaps all the benefits. And so you can avoid all of that. You can avoid having to go through that level of pain and having that seller hit their head against the brick wall multiple times because of the level of pain. You can avoid all that when you get the C-suite and all the orchestrating pieces of the business properly aligned. But I will not work with a client if the CEO is unwilling to participate in the work, because I just know how active a role they have to take and how much they have to be educated in basics in order to properly resource different facets of the business for the whole game to be played. And so I would say those are the three major pieces of advice. Be patient, remember it's an endurance sport, and the CEO has gotta be willing to work.
You can hear some of your military lessons coming through there too, and leading from the front as well.
I closed a big piece of business because the CEO was telling me the story about how they had recently had to let go of their federal seller. And I looked him straight in the eye and I said, "How do you know you weren't the problem?" And with that, he kind of went, "Oh." And I said, like, "Let me just break this down for you. These are all the pieces that have to come into play here. And you have to really own a lot of them." And with that, we had a great working relationship, a spectacular assessment, and we really looked at all the gaps and the stuff that had to be untangled in their company. And then sure enough, put in a plan that they assigned a program manager to with milestones and deadlines across the whole company. And now they're off and running. So because the CEO was involved and did the work and put the resources in place, the whole company is now humming in a much smoother way and really pursuing the federal business.
That's one of those confronting questions that, we need from time to time, and to get us maybe thinking about those things we don't know.
Well, and to his credit, he was a veteran. So he had served and he knew a lot about acquisitions. He knew a lot about selling to the government, but all of his experience had nothing to do with building a commercial software business. He was such a joy to work with because he listened. Wouldn't it be great if the world was just better at listening? Just period. We could probably end on that statement, but
Well,
uh,
one of the fundamentals of
yeah,
leadership is just listen to learn,
yeah.
right?
It was a tremendous opportunity for us to really kind of help him and his company get on a journey and get aligned in a way that made them understand exactly what had to be done across different departments and different teams. And yeah, it was a joy to watch.
It's again why I think what you're doing is so important, especially when you're focusing on supporting veteran run businesses, because they bring so much leadership perspective, connection, purpose, and passion. And I'm curious if you have a story about a veteran that you've met or heard about that really inspires you to kind of do the work you do.
One veteran that really inspires me is Nick Miller, who's been on your podcast. Nick has always been a real inspiration to me because he is tireless in his pursuit of what he believes to be the best path forward. He's such an advocate for industry. He's such a creative thinker. And he just inspires me because he's not afraid to tick people off. He's collaborative. He'll never be disrespectful. Um, but he is not afraid to kind of call a spade when someone is in the way of progress. And he and I have often spoke. He and I go so far back. We were in the same freshman dorm, same co-ed freshman dorm at Lehigh University years and years and years ago. Um, but I remember after we had both left the Army, after I had helped him get connected into AWS and we were there together. I remember catching up with him and he said, "Kristin, no one else seems to want to actually solve the problem. There are problems around. We talk about them. We have meetings about them. We write documents about them. We socialize them, but no one seems to actually want to solve the problem." And Nick and I were kind of known for getting things done in the organization. It was because there was a problem and we would just not stop until we solved it. And so I think, right, Nick sort of typifies that for me in terms of what veterans bring, right? I feel like veterans, you're constantly faced with problems. You're constantly having to solve them. You almost don't know how to walk by a problem and not solve it. And so I see Nick as a very stellar example of not just a peer and colleague who I have a lot of respect for, but a veteran. And I definitely consider him an entrepreneur in this space.
As we wrap up, how can folks follow you and support you on your journey?
I think the best place is LinkedIn. So just find Kristin Sargent at LinkedIn. And one of the things that we released right before AUSA, because we wanted to be of more service to more people, is we're offering complimentary 30-minute assessments just to help people get an initial read on where they are, just some things to consider as they're building their businesses and looking ahead to potentially selling to the sector. So if you find me on LinkedIn, we can get you connected to a complimentary assessment and go from there.
Kristin, thank you so much for coming on the show today. For the chats about modernization, about what you're working on at Sargent, what's driving your mission, keeping those fires burning. We so appreciate you, what you're doing in the world, and come back anytime. And thanks for being on the show.
It was a joy. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Story Behind the Stone is available on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on the Reach Across America radio network, on iHeartRadio, Audacity, and TuneIn. Just search for Wreath. We air every Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern on the Reach Across Radio Network. Thank you for tuning in.